Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, we have Sam Sorbo on. You can, of course, hear her on episode 19. She's written a number of books for homeschooling and Christians, and one of those books is Words for Warriors. She's also written a book called They're Your Kids, and a little bit about her journey as well. And her latest book is The Parent's Guide to Homeschool. And I think the subtitle is Making Education Easy and Fun. And we always have fun talking to Sam. We also had her on episode 69 talking about one of her new movies. But Sam, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you guys.
I wanted to talk for the first, 15, 20 minutes, a little bit about school choice. We're in school choice week. We're doing a school choice series. And, your book, Words for Warriors, really kind of shed the light on the grammar and how society and movements use words to try to influence some people and some worldviews and maybe get you to do things that you normally wouldn't accept. And, from the moment I heard some of these school choice sayings, they just didn't resonate with me and my worldview, being from a conservative background, having my faith in Christ, not my faith in government, and of course, being raised outside of the system. And so, one of the very first things you hear, I think, is just this term school choice. So when I say that or hear that, I say I'm 100% for school choice and 0% for the government funding that choice. But talk about maybe just that term that we're talking about this week, school choice. Like, what does it mean, and how does that, how are they weaponizing those words?
Well, it's so fascinating. First of all, think of it, school choice, and then we have the pro-choice movement. And so they've aligned themselves somehow with this very deathly movement without maybe even realizing it, and how inured we are as a public to define our terms. And of course, this is something that we learn in debate, is the first thing that you have to do in order to have a cohesive or a cogent conversation is define your terms. Also, remark on the fact that they actually have designated a week for school choice. So how can you be against it? There's a whole week devoted to it. What's wrong with you, right? And of course, we bristle at that because we are independent thinkers and we don't like to be corralled into a certain way of thought or a certain way of behavior. Of course, I'm against school choice, and I will tell you why. But first, let me point out, the seduction is, hey, it gets kids out of government schools. Well, you think, right? Except that if the money follows the child, where's the money coming from? So your government funds are actually infiltrating your private schools. And that's the way that we should look at this, is that when they say that the funds follow the child, ask, okay, what funds? Government money. Oh, okay, so the government follows the child. Is that really what we want? We want the government following our kids into school? And so this is really ultimately a takeover of the private independent schools. Unfortunately, I wish I could come down on the side of school choice. I wish that it was the right thing to do, but it's not. It's actually single payer education. And I was on a stage in a panel, and the guy said to me, well, isn't that what we have already? And I'm like, not quite. We still have some private schools, but you want them all to be governmentalized with school choice. And that's the danger.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what they view is they see a child leaving a brick building that is managed and paid for by the government, and moving them to a brick building that is managed by some entity, but still paid for by the government. And they want to call that not public school, that this person is privately educating their kids, right?
Right. But mind you, it's worse than that, because what they're doing is they're taking the child from the government, right? from the government paid for school, but the child is bringing the government money into the other school. And they're still saying, no, that's independent. That's not government funded. Well, yes, it is. You've just invited the funding into that school. And of course, as your mother says, with the shekels come the shackles. And so that's the problem. So it was interesting because the person that I was debating on stage is a very intelligent, very well thought individual. And I completely flipped his thinking on it because he was like, well, aren't we single payer education at this point? Not quite. We still have reserves of individuals who are outside the system, and we need to preserve them and not go for school choice. We need to go for no school week. I'd support that. School free week. Yay.
I think a lot of people would support that. There's this notion that that somehow the money won't follow the child. But the other thing is, like, that's what they're saying in Arizona is like, oh, it's so great. There's no strings attached. But like,
Right.
when was it ever a conservative principle to give out taxpayers' dollars without any strings? Isn't that the antithesis of a conservative view?
Actually, that's, we fought our Revolutionary War. We established this nation because we did not believe in taxation without representation, right? And when you're just giving people money from the government, that's taxation because that's where that money comes from without representation, meaning we have no say over how they spend my money that I paid with my taxes. And Arizona is such a great example of how wrong this can go because I remember I actually presented to a body of legislators. And when I was done telling them basically how bad school was and how we should not be pro-choice when it comes to schools and all that, the Arizona legislator who was there said, sure, except that in Arizona, we figured out how to get around all of that. And so we have this new legislation that provides funding for every child and there are no strings attached. And I'm like, really? You think there are no strings attached? There are always strings attached. You can't see them yet, but they will be attached. And so what happened in Arizona was like the worst possible tsunami in that because the money followed the child, it raised all the tuition rates. So now your money is worth less because they've inflated the school dollars to the point where a private citizen who may not even want to access that money is now priced out of the system. But also the funding that had no strings attached, now it has a few strings. Oh, no, wait, there are more strings. We need to put strings on that. No, you can't just have the money. We need to put some strings on it. And so the whole thing's blowing up. Same thing in my state, in the great state of Florida. Unfortunately, they're doing the experiment. And the experiment is going very badly. And the question is whether they will, because we've lost the scientific method, whether they will take the results of the experiment and develop a new hypothesis or whether they'll just keep feeding the beast.
Yeah, I was at an event. Erica Donaldson, whose husband is in the Freedom Caucus. I'm generally a big fan of what the Freedom Caucus is doing. She was speaking. I guess they own a bunch of schools in Florida now. And she said, well, the state of Florida hasn't given us our money yet, so we'd have to lay off all of or a significant portion of our staff, except for the people who are privately paying. So thank God that our people are paying out of their own pockets. Otherwise, our business would go under. And so even if there are no strings attached, like hypothetically, if that were possible from the government itself, there's a mind virus, a woke mind virus maybe, that is starting to take over your mind and your heart when you start saying those things out loud at conservative events.
And here's the thing, like I don't want this to come off as an attack because I like I like them and they're trying their best, but they don't I don't think that they quite understand what will happen. And it maybe hasn't happened yet because they haven't received their funding. But Florida had no strings attached and they ran out of money so fast. And then the following year, they put some strings on it because they ran out of money. So of course they can. It's supply and demand. And of course the government's going to say, oh, but wait a minute, not for that kind of horseback riding, because that's not really educational. Like, and you already know how to horseback ride enough, so we won't send you the money for that. But what will happen eventually is, I think that her schools are Christian. I can't remember, but let's just take anybody, right? And they've developed a series of schools, and they're Christian schools because that's what we support, because education is not education if it's not Christian. Yes, I said that out loud because the truth is the truth. Okay. So if you have a school and it's not Christian, then it's not educating. But if you have a school that educates Christian, then what will happen is you're employing, say you have 5 schools, so you're employing 200 teachers. And then the government says to you, but you have to teach some Quran because, otherwise you're just Christian and we can't give you government funds because that would be partisan.
Right.
Never mind. But right. And then you're in a pickle because like Erica Donaldson just said, she's got a problem because she can only afford to pay as much as the private payers have given her money for. And so the government is now paying for, say, 150 of your 200 teachers. What are you going to just let them go? They're going to lose their jobs. You're not going to let them go. You're going to teach some Quran. You're going to teach some Quran. And you know what else you're going to teach? You're going to teach some LGBT, because let's face it, the kids need to know that stuff when they're 5. And that's what will happen. And all of our schools will then become corrupt. And the only way to keep it pure is to keep the government out. And that means no school choice, unfortunately, because the initial push to school choice is, get the kids out of government schools. Absolutely. But I'm sorry, I have not seen a program yet. I know that they're trying to develop one in Oregon. They haven't been successful as far as I know. I've not seen a program that involves government money that will end well for the individual. That's just the way that it is.
Yeah, I mean, and
if men were angels.
If men were angels and we're not, and even the angels fell, a third of them. So
right, and even then,
not a really good track record there either. So I mean, I get like people want to get them out of public schools, and I'm for that, right? I've been working almost 30 years, 27 years. Our organization's been around helping people get out of government schools and homeschool their kids. But part of the reasons that they're government school is because they're funded by the government, and there's already schools that are funded by the government that are run by other people. They're called charter schools.
Right.
And by and large, that experiment has gone extremely poorly as far as, there hasn't been remarkable results like they thought.
Well, some of the charter schools have done really well. And so those are the ones that they hold at. Look, it's done really well. Look at this one. Don't look at those. Look at this one. Right. Sure. And so, but unfortunately, here's the biggest problem of all, because we don't know what education is. And the reason that we don't know what education is as a general society and as a government and all that, right? We don't understand what education is because we all went to school and we learned certain things about what education is and how it's defined and how it works in school that were abject lies. I mean, so then you have to take apart. I understand you have a child who likes to take things apart. You have to take apart the whole thing and you have to start from the ground up. And I will tell you that homeschooling my kids, I focused predominantly on academics. That was not the correct choice. And I was very blessed that because we finished our academics, because we did academics, but we finished them so early in the day, my kids had the remainder of their days, maybe half days, of no school for the longest time, that's what set them free to pursue truth. Because you can only pursue enough truth in academics by shackling the child to the academics, right? At a certain point, the child rejects the education. They reject learning if you shackle them too severely. And I was lucky because we did classical conversations. I kept them free enough, and I didn't understand at the time that this is what I was doing, but I preserved their freedom enough for them to now be so fervently in pursuit of the truth. And, my kids are now 23, 20, and 19.
Yeah. Congratulations. You got all 3 out of the house and all 3 are flourishing.
And this is why I focus on keep your kids out of the school institution, because institutionalized learning is barely learning at all. It only works for maybe 10% of the population.
Yeah, and so many get left behind, and it's just not a
Yeah.
good system. And so you've been a passionate advocate for helping people homeschool. So tell us about your new book, Parents Guide to Homeschool. Tell us a little bit about what
Yes,
people can find in
I'll
there.
just show it right there. Parents Guide to
Yeah, there you go.
Homeschool is really the way to rethink what you think about education. And I'm trying to set parents free. So we think that you need a teacher. I would put it to you, you don't need a teacher. This is what's beautiful about classical conversations is you don't have a teacher. The parent is the teacher, right? But
Yeah.
but the paradigm with you guys is you have a tutor. And the tutor is a lead learner, is somebody who may be learning alongside you, but learning maybe a step ahead or a step faster because they're adult and you're not. My conclusion is the parents learn as much as the children. And we've lost this. We've lost this idea that God gives you your child to teach you. And you shouldn't lose that because there's so much to be gained from learning from your child. And so the child becomes self-taught. And that's really the ideal paradigm because there's really only one teacher, and that's the Almighty. And so if you can train your child to search for truth and trust God to reveal truth to them, then they will become a lifelong learner and you won't have to worry about them because as we're living in the age of technology and everything is shifting all the time, right? The schools are preparing kids for jobs that existed 100 years ago, right? Yeah. And the colleges even, and that's why the colleges aren't churning out capable young adults, sadly. Mm-hmm. But if you take your foot off of the gas there and just allow your children's curiosity to drive and to be the engine of their learning, then they will find what God has in store for them. They can't help it. And that's the new way to think about education. It's the old way, actually. It's the old way to think about education. You know this. We've only had high school since the 1800s. School is the grand experiment. We never did this before. In history, we never did this before. We've had tutors. Yeah, you would send your child to learn the things that they were gifted toward, but you wouldn't send your child to learn from Socrates if they really wanted to be a woodworker. That would be absurd. Why would you pay Socrates to teach your child when your child really wants to be a woodworker, right? So yeah. It's a completely different, it's a mind shift. And what's exciting to me is it's very clear that the United States and maybe the world over is ready for this shift towards valuing children and valuing their God-given innate abilities as opposed to force feeding them what a bureaucratic system has now determined is reasonable and worthwhile. I mean, New Jersey just passed a law that said that teachers no longer need to be proficient in reading and math to be teachers. It sets up an unnecessary barrier. Are you kidding me? Why would anybody send their child to a New Jersey school? And here's the problem. We don't believe it. We can read it in black and white. It's in the newspaper. I just posted it. But we don't believe, in our heart of hearts, the parents of New Jersey, they don't believe it. They're like, well, that's not my teacher. I mean, my teacher will be, because I know the principal or school. I know whatever. And the fact is, we've gone so far off the rails because we went to school. We've gone so far away from Christian ethics. And thou shalt not steal, which means you shouldn't be doing a job for which you're not capable. You shouldn't be pretending to do a job for which you're not capable, right? Or this idea that money is more valuable than family, than relationship, than personal honor, than personal value, right? And so all of these teachers who are teaching in a broken system, they can't sacrifice their jobs. They need the money. And they'll sacrifice everything else because they don't want to lose their jobs. And somehow we've made that okay in society. You don't have to stand up for your beliefs because you need your job. And so... Sorry, go ahead. I talked to you.
Oh, no, I'd say it. No, I mean, I think that's a good point. Going back to the school choice thing is like, I know when some of this LGBT stuff was being introduced into our public schools, a lot of school teachers are just saying what you were just saying is, we'll just hold our nose and teach it. Like, I'm against it, but I'll just, do
Right.
what they want me to do
I'll
because
teach
I
abject
need
lies.
to pay my bills.
I will teach abject lies to young, impressionable children. Listen, better that a millstone be tied around your neck, you people. You need to understand you are wreaking havoc in these young people's lives that they will be very hard pressed to recover from. I'm not saying they can't recover, because we can all be redeemed and we can all recover. But why would you put stumbling stones in their way? Why do we agree to allow our children to be taught lies? Do parents not understand that when you send your child to somebody, you are telling the child, trust this person, I trust them. They know better than I do. And they don't, and you have no idea who you're putting your confidence in. And then when it turns out that that person betrays the trust of the child or does something to damage the child, it's still on you, parent. Mm-hmm. It's still on you, and it will have repercussions in your relationship with your child. I was speaking at an event this a couple of years ago, and a woman stood up and she said, I really want to convince my daughter to homeschool because of everything that happened to her in school and everything that happened in our relationship, and our relationship suffered because of it. And I said, well, maybe you owe your daughter an apology. Not that it was your fault, but you sent her to that school. And so you put her in the way of that steamroller, and right. She suffered because of it. And if you acknowledge that and take responsibility for it, she will be able to forgive you. And maybe that will incite her. And, in that actual moment, I didn't know her daughter was sitting next to her. She was standing, and she said to the whole crowd, I hereby acknowledge and I apologize for putting my daughter in school. I'm so sorry I did that to you. We have to overcome the damage that's been done in our culture by the schools. And I'm not blaming teachers.
Yeah.
Let me be very clear. If you know what you're doing now, then stop doing it, right? But I don't blame the teachers. We were all convinced. I was convinced school is the best thing. And I hated school.
Yeah.
and this is the other thing that we learn in school. And so all of this is in my book, by the way. This is the revelation that's in my book for people. I thought that I was the odd man out because I hated school. I hated all the socializing stuff. I hated the academics, even though I prospered and I did very well academically. I didn't like the books. I didn't like carrying the books. I didn't like the homework. Like, I hated school. And I thought that that was my problem. That was a fault in me. And it wasn't. It wasn't. School teaches us that where we don't thrive, it's personal. It's personally our culpability. And where we do thrive, somehow it's the school. So the captain of the football team is because school socialized him. But the bully, oh no, that's particular between the bully and his parents and society in general and social media and whatever. No, we have a bullying problem because schools teach bullying. And I don't know why we won't see that, but actually I do know why we won't see it. We won't admit that because we've been trained in school that school is good. 13 years of school is good. Don't criticize the school. Well, I'm here to criticize.
Yeah. Well, our society has become comfortably numb. And during COVID, that kind of rash, or you could say something popped up where the parents were forced to look at what was being done to their children and realizing it was something that was not what they expected or anticipated, that they suddenly realized why their daughter was having emotional problems when you could see how they were being educated. And literally millions of parents said, we're going to homeschool our kids that had never done it before, all at once. And in some ways, I think this school choice movement is trying to, like the belly of the beast was exposed and the villagers were going out after it, and kind of government protecting itself says, wait, we'll share some of this wealth that we've hoarded at the back of our cave for you. Just don't kill us. And let us. We'll help manage, your school system down there in that village. We've got all this money. We've got the experts. You're just a dumb parent. Of course, parental choice is good. So we want to choose which school the dragon runs that you send them to so that you're not, subject by zip code or something.
Right.
And it really seems like it's another way of devaluing parents and their responsibilities.
Oh.
And you'll hear a lot of people on our side talk about how like the war on poverty has impoverished, created high divorce rates, impoverished entire people groups in our country when the government stepped in and paid for things it had no responsibility of stepping in and paying for, and school being one of them. And they don't seem to be able to see that now they're doing the same thing to private education, that currently and historically there's been a way out of the public school, and that was, paying for it yourself or getting scholarships or raising funds or doing something like that. But once school choice, if that's fully adopted all over the US, like right now, one of the ways that we shame as homeschoolers, CC is a little bit more expensive, but the average homeschooler spends between like $800 and $1,200 a year homeschooling per kid, versus the government spends, I don't know what it is now, like 18,000 when you include all the federal dollars per
Yep.
kid, and like only 30% of them can read. So it's good that there's momentum to get them out, but they're destroying the family again. You're wedding healthy families to a sick government and expecting that
Wow.
somehow will not create a sicker family, and how the family will eventually just, even if there's no strings, become dependent on these government funds. And that in itself is a string. Even if the government's not making you do things, that is against your moral worldview. And so,
Well, but the other thing is why? Why do we have to send our money to the government in order to spend our money? I mean,
get it back.
so this is the one loophole or sort of what splinter of light that I see in this debate is the discussion of a tax credit. And I think actually Trump brought it up at one point. The discussion of some kind of a tax break for families with children to afford to homeschool. That's the one thing. Hey, the government won't take as much of your money because you're a family. But I don't know what the litmus test might be. And that's the danger, right? Again, is there might be some correlation that you still have to jump through some hoops or whatever. And of course, now we have to consider all the data capture, right? Yeah. In previous decades, we haven't really had to deal with. Now we kind of do. I think that it's so obvious now. I think we can make some big inroads, that people have understood that the government really doesn't necessarily have your back. And it's not necessarily pro-citizen, actually. And so if we can convince people to be more skeptical of their government, which, by the way, the reason that we're not skeptical of our government is because we went to government schools and we learned government's good. But now we're seeing, oh, maybe not. Maybe the whole COVID thing wasn't a good thing. Maybe the government didn't have my best interests at heart. When you start to consider that, then start to consider you have an opportunity with your children to start over, to get a redo. Okay. I love this. Dr. Laura used to say, you have two opportunities for the parent-child relationship in your life. One when you're a child and the other when you're a parent. And parents out there, you have to understand it's in the government's best interest to make you all as lonely as possible, because the lonely people are more reliant. But if you have a strong family, you become more independent, strangely, right? The more dependent you are on family and intra-reliant on family members, the more independent you are of government services, all that stuff. And it was funny because I heard somebody tell me this story. Was it you? It was you. You told me a great story from Phoenix, I think.
Yeah.
The aunt who was so thankful that the government stepped in to it wasn't the aunt, but so that the aunt didn't have to step in, the government stepped in instead. Yes, That's the goal of the government, is to basically replace the family, to replace the parents, certainly. And they've done a damn good job of that. It's not that they do a good job of anything else.
They do a good job of usurping power, and we do a good job of giving them that power to usurp, so we don't have to have that responsibility.
What I want people to understand is education is so much easier than you think. It's self-driven.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to turn into Einstein, but we know that already. So what are you worried about? Oh, if I don't put my child in calculus, he'll never know calculus. How many people do you know who know calculus?
Yeah.
And you see people every day who are doing really well in their lives. What I love is all the examples that I have of friends of mine who are uber successful financially. Okay. Uber successful, never went to college.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, and that's frankly like so many of my friends never went to college. And then the rest of them went to college, but don't actually pursue for a living what they studied in school.
Hey, everyone. Interrupting today's episode to tell you a little bit about the Education Independence Network. We all know that school choice is a trending topic, and it's hard to know what to make of it. So we have created ChooseEducationIndependence.com so that you can choose better. In Challenge 2, our theme is Freedom Provides Opportunities for Noble Choices. So, how do we make good choices when so much information is flying around us? Well, we need good information. So join the Education Independence Network and learn about advocacy opportunities in your state. And go to ChooseEducationIndependence.com to find out more today. That's ChooseEducationIndependence.com. Now let's go back to the show. Yep. It's just a really expensive ticket that shows you're willing to show up and pay a lot of money for 4 years, and businesses know that you can be reliable to them, if only because you're in a bunch of college debt that you accumulated, so that you're not going to be able to quit if they give you, but terrible things to do.
It's true, but now the trend is for businesses to be skeptical of college graduates because you've been taught to think inside the box. And so businesses are actually going outside that box and saying, no, I'm looking for high school graduates only. And pretty soon they'll be considering non-high school graduates, because if you were smart enough to drop out of high school, maybe you've got a little bit more going on. Maybe not, but maybe you have. And we're still relying on statistics from like the 40s and the 50s and saying, oh no, a high school graduate has a much better, income over lifetime. Yeah, because he graduated in 1950 before all the woke crap hit.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, so many of the people that I know that, because I kind of coached in some poverty areas for rugby, was a lot of the people who didn't show up is because they just felt like their time was being wasted over and over again. And that they weren't learning anything when they were there. And why would they want to spend their time there? And so then they go to, they typically try a lot of times get involved in bad things, but we need to give them good things to do. And, like you're saying, like we're trying to have people that can just educate themselves on issues, and we want our kids to grow up and be informed individuals, because we don't know what the next, leap in AI is going to do, or, is Elon Musk going to take us to Mars or any of these things? We don't know what those jobs are going to be 12 months from now, much less 20 years from now. And one of the most cruel things that I think from our public school system is that only about 30% of kids graduate being literate. And, I'm sure there's some kids that graduate, go through homeschooling that don't become literate for whatever reason, if they don't have mental issues. But like the number one thing you should do to help these students do is read over a 12-year period. But the problem is, like, you would think in a 12-year period, you could teach a human how to read. And if you teach them how to read and how to read well, the rest of it, like you said, doesn't really matter, because if it's of interest or of need of them, they know how to go look it up and read about it themselves. But the problem is the school system needs parents involved to teach them to read. Like they need the parents reading to them at night and helping these things out. And the school system itself tells parents not to get involved.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, they've gone that direction. However, statistically, the number one predictor of academic success is parental involvement. Well,
Yeah.
let's maximize that then. Get rid of the school and just have the parents. And honestly, that's the paradigm. That's the paradigm that parents should be embracing, is losing the school, because the school is an enormous negative unless you have a child that adheres to the academic model of a teacher in a class. And even then, I have a hard time justifying sending a child to school. But how do you know you have that child? You have to submit that child to this torture in order to find out that, oh no, this is actually the one child that thrives in this environment. And I'll tell you a quick story. My daughter, who is now 19, when she was 16, she told me this. So she went to public school kindergarten. This was before I had a lot of this figured out. All my kids went to public school kindergarten, and it was half day. I mean, really, what's the worst that can happen, right? Well, when she was 16, she finally told me that one day in kindergarten, when they were reading their sight words, it was her turn to read her sight words in front of the class, and she didn't get them right, and the class laughed. And that's when she learned that she was the stupid one.
12 years of that in her mind.
In her mind.
Yeah.
Not 12 years, what? 10, 12.
10
yeah, no,
years,
you're right. You're right. Like 11, 12 years, a decade of that. And all that time I had been telling her how, because she's very bright and she thinks of things that I don't think of, which to me is, stroke of brilliance, because I never thought of it that way. Right. So I'm telling her how brilliant she is. And meanwhile, she thinks I'm lying to her. So it's not just that she thought she was stupid, which is a horrible thing to do to a child. Right. It's that she thought that her mother was lying to her also, which damaged our relationship all that time, that I didn't even know. And I'll tell you, the circumstances of my discovery of her, not reading her sight words was probably something like, oh, we did sight words today. This is the kindergarten teacher. And she messed up. It was funny. The class laughed. But maybe you want to work with her a little bit more on her sight words. Yeah. And so my experience of that was, it was literally not even a blip on the radar. But for her, it was a seminal moment in her life. And my counseling to parents is, you're going to screw it up, but better you than they. And don't believe the lie that they are better off screwing your child up than you are, because that's the lie. It's funny because I just interviewed Abby Johnson, who, as you know, is the pro-life warrior. And I asked her, what's the one piece of advice that you would give your younger self? And she said, I would tell myself to trust my parents more. And I want to tell parents, you've been chosen by God for these individuals that he's placed in your hands. You are more than enough, because in him you will find yourself sufficient. And don't discount that because society's telling you, oh no, God's wrong. Don't discount that.
Well, it's funny because that reminds me, I was listening to Khan speak, the guy who created Khan Academy, and I was at this event where he was doing a preview for his new AI math modules that they're going to be rolling out in Khan Academy. Really slick stuff, like pretty cool stuff. You can see why people are going to really dive into it, although I think that there's a lot of issues with it. We won't explore those today. I'm sure I'll do an episode on it in the future. But the funny thing was, the very first part of his speech, and I'm sitting next to my wife, and he goes, the best education a person can have is themselves and a mentor that loves them. And but since that's not possible, AI can step in. And I turned to my wife and if God only knew what he was doing, if only he gave 2 adults and one of them could spend a lot of time with them.
But here's the thing. Schools have taught us that you need a teacher. That's a lie, because there's no teacher that can teach you anything that you don't first choose to learn, meaning you teach yourself. Now you can find somebody who is good at teaching, who will convey information to you that you then teach yourself or learn from, right? But for us to think that the only way for a child to learn math is to find a good teacher, that is enslavement to the system. And so I reject that, because I know, and in fact, I know this from an example is a friend of mine. She took algebra twice and failed both times. And then when she was older, she had kids and her kid needed to learn algebra. And she's like, darn it, I'm going to teach myself algebra. She got a book. She read the book. She taught herself algebra and passed with flying colors. And so you parents who think that you're not capable, and this is specifically maybe for the younger kids because they haven't even reached that level. If you make your children understand that everything is in the book and all they have to do is read the book and they can learn from the book. And if they can't learn from the book, it's the wrong book and find a better book. Yeah. You will set your child free. They will be able to teach themselves anything. But we have parents who are, young parents, their kids are young and they're like, well, I can't teach high school math because I didn't understand high school math. And that's a me problem again, right? It's not that the school didn't teach me well. It's that I failed myself. I failed to learn. Don't put your kids into that, but do trust that God has a plan for them. You can find books that they can learn from and they can teach you. Because that's the best thing is when your kids get to 10, 11, 12, even younger, but when they get to 10, 11, 12, you can say to them, okay, show me what you just learned. What was that chapter about? And they will be able to tell you and teach you what they just learned, right? It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the end step of education is teaching
rhetoric.
Other people what you have learned. That's the rhetoric stage, as we call in classical education. And it's, they don't even get to that in government paid for systems around the world. So it's, and that's something, like you said, kids as young as 10 can do. And you don't have to know everything. I think one of the most beautiful things you can do with your family or your child is like, hey, I don't know that either, but let's go figure it out together.
Yes.
Go to the book, go to your encyclopedia. I know people don't have encyclopedias in their house anymore, but go research it online. Go find an expert at your church that maybe has a business in the field or works in the field. Talk to them, and then at the end, not only have you learned something, your student has learned something about that particular issue, but more importantly, they've learned the process of going to find out information for something that you don't know about. And they won't have to be, we have all sorts of issues in our society right now, but like one of them is like people just get nervous and break down over we're very fragile as a society. Like these are things that will make your child anti-fragile and make them available,
very
strong
good,
enough to do whatever God gives them in the future. So
when you said that fragility as a society, I love that because we're fragile when we don't know things. We feel so vulnerable that we don't know things. That's a result of our schooling. Because in school, we learned if you don't know something, you're stupid. There's huge judgment on you. Shame, you don't know that. He doesn't know that. And we need to step away from that. So certainly don't consign your children to that, right? Mm-hmm. School choice, factory schools for all.
Yeah. Whichever building you want to send them into that's paid for and ultimately controlled by the government in the end. Sam, where can we pick up your newest title?
Oh, yeah. Just go to sorbostudios.com and do sign up for the newsletter because that's how we stay in touch with people. I don't trust social media, even though I'm on it. Also, follow us on social media. And then I have my Locals channel. So look for me on Locals and join the community there for support.
Awesome. And you have is there a special place to find your podcast and the different things that you're doing?
No, no place special. It's everywhere. And Locals.
All right. Yep. Locals. I know a lot of creators that are on. It's a great platform. So definitely go check out Sam Sorbo on Locals. Pick up her newest book. And thank you so much to have this conversation with us today about school choice, about how parents matter and how parents are more than capable of homeschooling their kids and giving them a great education without government interference. So to the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in this week. It is School Choice week. We are explaining what that actually means so you can be an informed citizen. So go ahead and check out all 5 episodes that we're launching this week. And otherwise, tune in to our regularly scheduled program on Wednesdays and check us out on YouTube and on X. So thank you so much. God bless and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.